This is part 2 of the kidnapping of Virginia Piper 50 years later. If you haven't had the chance to listen to part 1, I would encourage you to start there first. You're going to get a lot more background on the actual details of the Piper kidnapping. In the spring of 1976, Americans were awash in red, white, and blue as the nation celebrated its 200th birthday. A Romanian gymnast named Nadia Comaneci was about to show the world what perfection looked like. And the FBI in Minnesota was going nowhere fast in one of its most high-profile cases in history. 4 years earlier in 1972, Twin Cities socialite Virginia Piper had been kidnapped from her backyard in Orono, Minnesota. Ginny, as she was better known, was deadheading the pansies in her garden when 2 men broke into her house, tied up the cleaning ladies, and demanded she come with them. They put a pillowcase over her head, put her in the back seat of their car, and drove 2 hours north to Jay Cook State Park near Duluth, where they chained her to a tree. She sat there for 48 hours, often in downpouring rain. For 2 days, she lived on soggy sandwiches and soda, while her kidnappers stood watch, waiting for her prominent businessman husband, Harry Bobby Piper, to deliver the $1 million ransom. Ginny eventually came home alive, but in the years to follow, the question of who took her remained a mystery. However, by the end of 1976, when Nadia Comaneci's perfect tense had become old news and bicentennial fervor was fading like a parade gone by, there was now renewed hope for the Piper case. You see, a man authorities had earlier cleared of the Piper kidnapping was once again back in the spotlight. This time after murdering 4 people only 2 hours from Ginny Piper's backyard garden. Some speculated that the mass murder, as horrific as it was, had everything to do with Ginny Piper. You're listening to The Vault, a foreign communications podcast featuring true crime and general intrigue from the upper Midwest. This is Tracy Briggs. It had to be a frustrating time for the FBI in the weeks, months, and years following the Virginia Piper kidnapping. All eyes were on them to solve the case of the beloved socialite and her harrowing 2 days chained to that tree. It's estimated the FBI interviewed more than 1,000 people, many of them suspects. One of them, a man named Donald Larson, was a 45-year-old truck driver from Minneapolis. He was a big man who had been in trouble with the law from childhood, including serving stints in prison for robbery and burglary. While in prison, he met a kindred spirit. According to William Swanson, author of Stolen from the Garden, The Kidnapping of Virginia Piper, Larson met Kenneth Callahan while the two had overlapping prison sentences in the 1940s. He, like Larson, had a long record with charges including auto theft, burglary, and counterfeiting. And like Larson, he too was a suspect in the kidnapping. Now, because of the high-profile nature of the crime, the FBI was painting a really broad brush, looking into just about every Twin Cities area criminal they had heard of. That meant they would even look into a couple of petty thieves like Larson and Callahan. And there was more. Larson and Callahan actually matched, in at least broad terms, the descriptions of the kidnappers provided by Ginny and those cleaning women, and according to Swanson, were considered somewhat similar to the men involved in the passing of the ransom money. Even so, by the end of 1972, the FBI had decided to move past Larson and Callahan onto other theories they considered more viable. However, that wouldn't be all she wrote for the prison buddies. For whatever reason, by 1975, just 3 years later, when obviously those other more viable theories didn't pan out, it was back to Larson and Callahan. In fact, according to Swanson, a January 1976 FBI memo called Larson and Callahan prime suspects. But if Larson was trying to lay low to divert attention from the FBI that early winter of 76, he wasn't doing a very good job of it. Just 5 months later, he committed mass murder. Willow River, Minnesota sits at the heart of Pine County, about an hour and a half north of the Twin Cities via Interstate 35. With a population of 350 in 1976, it's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and if anything much happens, the locals on Main Street will be talking about it. That was the case in the days following Saturday, April 24th, 1976, when 5 people were gunned down at a farm 14 miles west of town. Newspapers described townspeople as numb and in shock from the brutal crime, unable to even discuss it without breaking into tears. Reese Fredrickson has been the Pine County attorney since 2015, and while he didn't grow up there, it was one of those cases he had always heard about.
It just, it always fascinated me. It was kind of like, I don't know, it might be a bit hyperbolic to say it, but it's like, it was kind of a holy grail for me to find something about that, that case.
He has the case files in his office and has done presentations about it over the years for an audience who hasn't forgotten.
And some of them kind of remember the pain the community had. And a few of them told me, it was a sad day. They still, to this day, they can still feel it.
In the years following the Piper kidnapping, Donald Larson was a middle-aged, disabled trucker who wanted to move to the country. He told buddies in the Twin Cities he wanted to get away from the crime in Minneapolis. So he bought an 80-acre property west of Willow River. That's about an hour and a half north of the Twin Cities. He lived there with his 32-year-old wife, Ruth, and their 5-year-old son, Mark, as well as Ruth's 2 sons from a previous marriage, 14-year-old Kyle and 12-year-old Scott. But trouble was brewing in the marriage by January of '76 when Larson found out that Ruth was having an affair with their neighbor, 34-year-old James Falch. Larson left, moved in with some friends in Minneapolis. But when he got wind that Ruth, back up there in Willow River, was planning to move out and move in with Falch, Larson rented a trailer and hit the road. He said later he wanted to go to Willow River to get his stuff out of the home before she could take it all.
And when he arrives, I think he expected that there would be nobody there and that he would beat the other people there and get his stuff and leave.
But when he drove up, instead, he found Falch, his 3 sons, and Ruth taking items out of the house and putting them in Falch's trailer. Larson, who had 2 loaded guns on him, flipped out. He shot Falch, then later told people he went outside to cool off, but that's when he was confronted by Falch's 12-year-old son, James Jr., who started calling him names. Larson shot him 3 times, once in the head. Fredrickson said Larson then went back inside the home.
His version of events is that he went in and confronted Ruth, and then there's a scuffle over the gun, and during that scuffle, the gun goes off and he shoots the 5-year-old boy in the head. The
5-year-old boy was Larson's own son, Mark, who, by all accounts, Larson adored. But Larson wasn't done yet. Ruth's oldest son, Kyle, and Falch's other 2 sons, 8-year-old Stephen and 5-year-old Brad, were hiding in the farmyard. But Larson found them.
And this is really chilling, like he lines them up and gets the gun out, and he's gonna, and he dry fire, so he's out of ammo, and then he stops to reload, and of course these kids run away, and I think the 2 Falches run to one neighbor, and Kai runs to a different neighbor. Yeah, there's actually a commissioner who was on the grand jury on this. He's like 70 some years old right now, but he told me that was the part that gave him nightmares.
But Larson's rampage still wasn't over. He then went back in the home and saw Ruth's middle son, Scott, walking through the doorway of the kitchen, and he shot him in the head. By this time, Falch had stumbled outside, and deputies were starting to arrive, one of whom starts recording Falch, who is bloodied and in pain.
Do you know who all he shot?
He shot me first.
What else can you tell me about what happened?
Oh, it's a jealous thing.
Did he say anything to you before he shot you?
He's just all mad.
Sergeant Jerry Olson was the first deputy on the scene. He's retired now, but he won't ever forget what he saw that day. Haunting images, especially of the children who'd been gunned down, including Larson's young son, Mark, who lay dead with his mother in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah, how could you forget it? you know. I remember it very well. The little boy, 5-year-old, had his right arm wrapped around his mom's leg, and in his left hand, he was holding a pack of juicy fruit gum, and he was wearing a railroad engineer's outfit, coveralls with the little engineer cap.
Olson says immediately they found 3 deceased people, Ruth and her 2 sons, Mark and Scott. But James Falch Sr., the man that Ruth was having the affair with, and James Falch Jr. were still alive. Olson and another deputy, Bob Johnson, grabbed the tape recorder to get Falch Sr. talking and possibly get a dying declaration for court.
Just lay still. Don't move.
Oh, I hurt.
I know it.
Don't get up now.
Oh, I hurt. I'm gonna die. I don't wanna.
Oh, you're going to be all right.
You think so?
But Falch wouldn't be all right. He died 2 days later. His son, James Falch Jr., died the next day. Following the shooting spree, Larson immediately took off for Minneapolis and holed up in the old Fair Oaks Motel, where a maid eventually found him, passed out from vodka and pills. It was the exact same day, the exact same time, his wife's funeral was being held just 5 blocks away. Fredrickson says the case was pretty much cut and dry. Larson had admitted to killing everyone in letters he wrote to friends, although he says he didn't mean to kill anyone, he just wanted to scare them. Once in court, he claimed he wasn't in his right mind during the shootings. But jurors only bought his insanity defense in the death of his son. So, while 5 people were dead, he was just found guilty of killing the other 4, and he was sentenced to life in prison for their murders. However, Donald Larson's days in court were far from over. In the hours after the murders, the FBI raced to Willow River to hopefully get some answers for their case, the kidnapping of Virginia Piper. Sergeant Olson actually ended up talking to the FBI. You see, he was given the assignment to stay overnight in the farmhouse where the murders had just happened when he ran into them.
The next morning, just at, it was probably about 6:30, 7 o'clock, I noticed there was a car down at the end of the driveway with 2 well-dressed gentlemen standing outside it, looking up the driveway. So I walked down there and asked if I could help them, and they introduced themselves as Pete Newman and Brent Cross from the FBI. But anyway, he was telling me that he had come up to talk to Mrs. Larson on the previous Thursday and asked if she could interview her. And she said, well, I'm leaving Dawn, so if you can wait till next week, I'd be glad to talk to you.
It seems Ruth had been Larson's alibi that weekend of the Piper kidnapping. Could she have been ready to come clean and change her story and say she wasn't with Donald Larson that weekend Virginia Piper was kidnapped? Maybe, maybe not, said Olson, but he does think it's possible. He says perhaps Mark told his father, Donald Larson, that the FBI had come to see Ruth, the alibi. So was Larson's story about being in a jealous rage over the affair just a story, and he was actually going to kill his wife to shut her up about the Piper kidnapping? Next time on the Kidnapping of Virginia Piper 50 years later, Larson and Callahan go on trial for the kidnapping, and authorities dig deeper to uncover the $1 million ransom. You've been listening to The Vault, a Forum Communications podcast covering true crime and general intrigue from the Upper Midwest. Forum Communications is proud to be part of The Trust Project. Learn more at thetrustproject.org.